Just kill me fast. Those 4 words slipped through cracked lips, and the rancher's world shifted. What he found beneath that blanket wasn't just a broken body, it was horror carved into flesh, silence branded into skin, and a plea no man should ever hear. This story isn't about heroes in dime store novels. It's about one rancher who stumbled onto a nightmare and had to decide if he'd walk away again or finally stand. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Because sometimes redemption doesn't ride in with a badge. Sometimes it rides in on a tired horse and a broken man who refuses to look away. The wind that morning carried nothing but dust and memory. Ethan Cole tugged the brim of his hat lower as he guided his horse along the south fence line, same way he had every morning for years. Fix the broken posts, check the water troughs, ride the perimeter, return to an empty house that whispered louder than any voice. Routine had become his shield against the ache of living alone. His wife had been gone 5 winters now, buried under a patch of red earth behind the barn. The town had stopped mentioning her name after the first year, and so had he. That silence had become a second grave. Some men die from bullets, but Ethan had been dying slowly from the weight of unspoken words, from the crushing stillness of a house that no longer echoed with laughter. That was when he saw it. A shape dangling crooked beneath the cottonwood, swaying with the lazy rhythm of the breeze. At first he thought it was a feed sack someone had tossed, maybe caught by the branch. But something about it was wrong, too still, too heavy. He slowed his horse, squinting. The sack was torn, edges sun-stained with dark patches bleeding through near the bottom. He almost rode on. A smart man would. Trouble didn't always bark before it bit. But then he heard it. Not a scream. Not even a cry. Just the faintest thread of breath. Human. Weak. Ragged. The sound froze him in the saddle. His hand went instinctively to the rifle slung at his back. For a long moment he sat there, heart drumming in his ears, fighting the instinct to turn away like he had too many times before. Finally, he dismounted. His boots sank into the soft earth as he stepped toward the hanging sack. Every nerve screamed at him to stop. He gripped the coarse burlap and pulled it down. The sack shifted with a weight far too human. He set it on the ground gently, the way you might set down a coffin. His knife slid through the rope binding the opening. And there she was. A young woman, maybe 25, her dress torn in 6 places. Skin blistered from sunlips split and bleeding. One wrist still wrapped in rusted wire that had cut so deep it left bone-white marks through the grime. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She simply whispered so soft he almost missed it. Just kill me fast. Ethan froze. The words struck harder than any bullet. She said them like a woman already gone, like the only mercy left in this world was death. He shook his head, dropping to one knee. No. He muttered more to himself than to her. He tugged away the thin blanket tangled around her shoulders and stumbled back. His stomach twisted. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted her dead. They wanted her erased. Scars crisscrossed her back in cruel, deliberate patterns. Bruises old and new painted her skin in grotesque shades, and burned into her wrist, jagged and raw, were 3 letters JKS. Ethan's hands trembled as he rewrapped the blanket around her body, shielding what he could from the merciless sun. "You're safe now," he whispered, though the words felt empty against the reality of her suffering. Her eyes fluttered open, gray hollow, yet still alive. She searched his face as though measuring if he meant it. Then slowly, her breathing steadied the faintest flicker of trust sparking in the ashes. Ethan knew then his life had just been split in 2 before he found her and after. He lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of grain, fragile as a bird with broken wings. His horse shifted uneasily, sensing the tension in the air, but Ethan mounted with her cradled against his chest. Every jolt of the saddle drew a faint wince from her, but she made no sound. The ride back to his ranch stretched into eternity. Dust clouds trailed behind them like ghosts, and Ethan's thoughts circled like vultures. Who had done this? Why had they left her to die in silence beneath a tree? And more damning, why did the letters branded on her wrist feel like a name he should already know? The ranch appeared over the rise as bleak as ever, a sagging porch, a roof that moaned whenever the wind pushed 2 chairs that hadn't been touched since his wife passed. But for her, it would have to be sanctuary. He carried her inside, setting her gently on the floor by the stove. She curled instinctively, pulling the blanket tighter as if the bed across the room might swallow her whole. Ethan crouched, stoking the fire until the warmth pushed back the chill. She didn't look at him, didn't ask where she was. She just stared at the door, eyes locked, as if expecting it to burst open. Ethan filled a tin cup with water, held it out. After a long hesitation, she sipped, then another. Her hands trembled, but the water stayed down. He cut bread, placed it beside her. She pinched off a piece, sniffed it like it might be poisoned, then nibbled. A few bites later, she stopped. Ethan sat back, hands resting on his knees, unsure what to say. He had never been a man of many words, and now felt like words would only scare her further. So he said nothing. Silence filled the cabin, but it wasn't the empty silence he had lived with for years. This silence held breath, presence, a fragile thread of life refusing to break. Night fell. Ethan lay on his bed but didn't sleep. He could hear her breathing softly by the stove. Each exhale was proof she hadn't given up yet, and for reasons he couldn't name that mattered more to him than it should. When dawn broke, he rose and set about his chores as usual, feeding the stock, patching the fence, fetching water. But when he returned, she was still there, still alive, still curled up in the same spot. That counted for something. He paused at the doorway, watching her. She looked small, fragile against the wide emptiness of the cabin. And Ethan knew whatever storm had carried her here, it wasn't finished. The question wasn't whether he was ready for it. It was whether he'd finally stopped turning away. The morning air was sharp, the kind that carried the smell of old wood smoke and the faint sweetness of sagebrush. Ethan Cole stepped outside to split a few logs, his muscles moving with the rhythm of years, but his mind wasn't in the work. Inside the cabin, the woman was still there, still curled beside the stove, as though the bed in the corner might grow teeth and bite. He paused mid-swing, staring at the split grain. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't asked a single question, and maybe that was why she hadn't run when dawn broke. Questions meant judgment. Silence meant choice. When he carried the fresh logs back inside, she flinched at the sound of the door. Her eyes, pale gray and rimmed with sleeplessness, locked on his hands as if bracing for a strike. Ethan kept his voice steady low. "It's just wood," he said, setting the logs carefully by the hearth. "Fire'll die without it." She didn't answer, only shifted, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. Ethan set a kettle over the flame, the hiss of boiling water filling the cabin like a warning snake. She shrank back, eyes darting. He watched, realizing she was listening to every sound as though it carried a hidden threat. He poured water into a tin cup and set it on the floor near her, close enough to reach far enough to give her space. Then he sat back, leaned against the table leg, and let the fire crackle between them. She reached for the cup after a long moment, fingers trembling. Sipped once, twice. Then she pushed it away as if too much comfort might betray her. The day passed that way, Ethan mending tack outside her, huddled in silence inside. Each time he returned, her eyes flicked to him, sharp and cautious, before falling back to the flames. That night, after the sky went dark and the coyotes began their chorus across the flats, Ethan lay on his bed, again staring at the rafters. Sleep didn't come. He could hear her breathing, shallow but steady. Hours stretched like wire until a whisper cut through. "You didn't touch me." Ethan blinked, sitting up. The firelight painted her in shifting gold and shadow. She was looking at him for the first time, not just through him. He swallowed words caught in his throat. He hadn't touched her, not beyond lifting her into the saddle, carrying her inside. He hadn't thought about it, and yet to her that silence, that absence meant everything. "I won't," he said quietly. "Not unless you ask me to." She nodded once, like that single sentence had more weight than anything else in the world. Then she pulled the blanket tighter and lay back down. For the first time, she ate every crumb of bread he'd set beside her. The next morning, Ethan found her outside. The sun was low, throwing long stripes of gold across the yard. She stood stiff, shoulders drawn back, hair pulled into a rough knot with a strip of cloth. Her hands shook faintly, but she was standing. He carried an axe to the chopping block, intending to work alone. But when he lifted the first log, she stepped forward, reached for another. Ethan hesitated. Then he let her. They chopped wood side by side, the rhythm of blade and echo filling the air. No words passed between them. None were needed. For a man who had spoken little in 5 years, it was the first time silence felt like company instead of loneliness. By evening, she was sitting at the table, still wary but closer. He set bread and beans before her. She ate in small bites, eyes darting now and then, but she finished, every drop. And for the first time since Ethan had found her, hanging under the cottonwood, a faint curve lifted the corner of her lips. Not a smile wide enough to erase scars, but enough to remind him she was still alive. That night, as stars burned above the plains and the coyotes called again, Ethan lay awake and felt something shift inside his chest. The silence in the cabin no longer felt like death. It felt like survival. But survival was fragile, and Ethan knew how quickly quiet could be shattered, because out beyond his fence line, the world didn't forgive, and trouble had a way of leaving tracks. The sun cracked the horizon in shades of red and copper, spilling across the open land like a wound reopening. Ethan Cole rose early, as he always did, but this time he wasn't alone in the routine. Through the cabin window, he caught a glimpse of her Clara, though he still didn't know her name yet, standing just outside the doorway. Her figure was framed in the first light, the blanket still draped around her shoulders. She watched him saddle the horse, every movement cautious, like she was bracing to flee if he raised his hand too quick. Ethan said nothing. He cinched the strap, tested the reins, then tipped his hat. Fence line, he muttered, more out of habit than explanation. She didn't answer, but she didn't retreat inside either. By midday, Ethan returned with sweat streaking his brow and dust clinging to his boots. She was still there, sitting stiffly on the porch steps, as if she'd forgotten what it felt like to sit in daylight. He carried a bucket of water toward the trough, but his eyes flicked to the dirt at the edge of the yard. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. They weren't his, and they weren't from town either. The earth was soft enough to hold the deep impressions of 3 horses. He crouched, brushing his fingertips along the tracks, his stomach tightening. The riders had lingered, circling near his south fence before turning west. Ethan straightened, scanning the horizon. Nothing but grassland stretching endless. Still, his gut told him the quiet wasn't safe anymore. When he walked back toward the porch, Clara was standing now, her eyes fixed on him. She hadn't spoken since last night's whisper, but her expression asked the question anyway. "Not mine," Ethan said, flatly, jerking his chin toward the fence line. Her lips parted. She gripped the blanket tighter, knuckles white, but no words came. That evening, after chores and a supper, she actually finished the tension pressed heavier than the night air. Ethan set his rifle by the door closer than usual. Clara noticed. Her eyes lingered on it, then on him. Finally, she sat a little closer to the fire, her voice barely audible. "I can't sleep." Ethan poured water into the kettle, the hiss filling the cabin. "Something feels wrong," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He stirred the flames, not meeting her eyes. But in his chest, he felt the truth of her words. Something was wrong. Later, as she pulled the blanket around her thin shoulders, Ethan caught sight of her wrist. The firelight revealed the scarred letters raw against pale skin. He stopped breathing for a moment. JKS. He'd seen that mark before. Years ago in Bisbee, a drunken outlaw had stumbled through the saloon bragging about things no man should ever say aloud. The letters were scrawled on his forearm, carved into his skin like a badge of belonging. Ethan had turned away then, pretending it wasn't his business. But now the same letters were burned into this woman's flesh. His failure to act had circled back, and it was sitting by his stove, staring at the door. He set the kettle aside, walked to the window, and stared into the dark fields. For the first time in years, something broke inside his chest. Not grief, not regret, but a low fire of anger he thought he'd buried with his wife. Clara's voice came soft, fragile. "Do you know them?" Ethan turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't answer, but she saw it anyway. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hand hovered over the rifle stock. Her breath shook. She curled tighter under the blanket, whispering to herself like a prayer. Ethan stood there until the fire burned low. He knew what those letters meant. He knew what they had done to her. And he knew one thing for certain: the men who left her to die weren't finished. The silence between them was no longer survival. It was a countdown. Sleep came to the cabin the way a stranger comes to a door, hesitant, glancing back over a shoulder, ready to bolt at the smallest sound. For the woman by the stove, it never crossed the threshold at all. She drifted in and out, breathing shallow, twitching like each breath had to fight through wire. Ethan lay on the bed and stared at the rafters, listening. The fire cracked. The kettle ticked as it cooled. Somewhere far off, a coyote called to nothing in particular. Then she cried out. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they learn to hide pain, a broken swallow that snagged on years of fear. Ethan was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. He kept his hands visible as he crouched by the stove. It's the fire, he said softly. Just the fire. You're safe. Her eyes flew open. She flinched, scuttling backward until the wall stopped, her blanket clutched under her chin. He didn't reach for her. He didn't dare. He simply nudged the lamp so the shadows fell differently, and the hard angles of the room softened into gold. Water, he asked. She nodded. He placed the tin cup on the floor between them and leaned back, giving her the space the world had stolen. She took 3 sips with careful, shaking hands. The cup clicked once against her teeth, a tiny sound that felt louder than wind. He should have asked her name. That was what men did when they meant to help. But names are promises, and he didn't know what kind he could keep. He settled for the only truth he had. No one's coming through that door unless I let him. Her gaze flicked to the latch, then back to him. You can't stop them, she whispered. Not if they want in. I've stopped enough, he said, and wished he believed it. She looked away. The blanket slipped from her wrist, and the brand caught the lamplight. 3 letters, skipped and jagged as if carved while she thrashed JKS. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't need the memory. It rose anyway, uncoiling like a rattler disturbed under a rock. Bisbee 3 years ago. A drover's night when the saloon windows sweated and the music from the piano was cheap enough to drown a man's conscience. A big fellow with a meaty laugh stumbled through the sawdust sleeves, rolled forearms proud. He slapped coins on the bar and bragged about the brand like it meant respect in some brotherhood no decent man would join. JKS, he crowed, tapping the scar with a dirty thumb. You see this, you mind your business. We do ours. Ethan had been 2 stools down, hat-low whiskey in hand. He had stared into the glass and pretended the reflection wasn't his. He told himself he didn't hear that it wasn't his place that men start fights for less than half a reason in towns like Bisbee. He paid his coin and walked out into a starless night, and if he heard a woman sob in the alley as a door banged shut behind him, well, memory has a way of polishing a man's cowardice into something he can sleep beside. He looked at the brand on the woman's wrist now and felt his cheeks burn, though the room was cool. The letters were not some outlaw's drunken boast this time. They were carved into a life he'd carried out of a sack under a cottonwood. What do they stand for? He asked before he could stop himself. She drew the blanket back over her wrist slow, like she was hiding a secret the world didn't deserve. It doesn't matter, she said. They'll change the letters if they have to. They don't care what it says, only that it stays. He clenched his jaw. Names matter. Her laugh was a breath without humor. Not out there. The fire sank, settling into coals. He fed it a sliver of log and watched it catch. She followed the small flame with her eyes, the way a shipwrecked person watches ashore. When she spoke again, her voice had a careful flatness, as if she had learned to file the edges off truth so it couldn't cut her on the way out. They take you far from town. They take your shoes and your voice. They tell you if you scream, the coyotes will come first. They don't need to hit you all the time. They just have to wait. She swallowed. After a while, you forget the sound of your name. He wanted to ask how she got away. He wanted to know who left her hanging in a sack and why. But questions were hooks, and she had scars enough. He said, only I heard 3 horses this morning on my south fence. Not from town. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. They circle before they choose, she murmured. They like to count doors. They like to learn where the windows are. Let 'em count, Ethan said. There's only one door here. That's the point. She stared at him, the ghost of confusion crossing her face. You don't even know me. I don't have to, he said. They sat with that between them a while. The night wore thin. She slid down until her head met the folded blanket and closed her eyes. This time sleep came like a tired bird, wary but willing to rest while the light was kind. Ethan remained on the floor until her breathing found a slow, steady pace, then climbed to his bed and lay on his side, facing the door. He didn't sleep. When dawn lifted the horizon like a lid off a pot, He got up, shrugged on his coat, and stepped out into air that smelled of frost and horses. The east was pink and thin as old silk. He walked the perimeter, found the tracks again. 3 horses, same depth, same casual curve, like a hand tracing the line of his fence to learn where the wood weakened. He followed them to the western dip where the creek bed went dry in summer and held a clinging edge of mud in spring. The print smeared there, then climbed the bank and headed toward the low ridge. He crouched, touching the churned dirt with 2 fingers. "You're circling," he murmured. "You're deciding." He straightened and looked toward the ridge. The day would be blue and brittle. If they were out there, they could see his roof glint through cottonwoods. They could see the one door and the one window and the man who stepped in and out without fear. He hoped that last part read true from a distance. When he stepped back into the house, she was awake, pressed small against the wall, clutching the blanket like armor. "I'm making coffee," he said. "It's bitter, but it warms you." She nodded once. He poured 2 cups and set one near her, then leaned in the doorway, blowing steam. "Those letters," he said after a time. "I saw them before. A man in Bisbee wore them like a badge." Her eyes flickered. There was a question there, but she didn't hand it to him. He answered anyway. "I walked away," he said. "I told myself it wasn't my fight." He tasted the bitterness and decided he deserved it. "I won't walk away again." She studied him for a long time. The quiet stretched thin but unbroken. At last she said, "They say men always come back the second time meaner." "Maybe I will," he said. "But not to you." Something loosened in her face, a tiny unclenching, as if a band around her skull had been cut. She took the cup, wrapped both hands around it, and drank. Around midday, Ethan saddled the horse. He moved slower than usual, not to stall, but to memorize the sounds of a safe place, the grind of leather, the jingle of bit, the plank creak under his boots. The world has a way of turning such sounds into goodbye if you don't listen while you have them. She stood in the doorway. Morning had softened to afternoon, the sky rinsed clean. The wind picked up a curl at her temple and laid it against her cheek. She didn't ask where he was going. She didn't demand to know why. He was grateful for both. "Town," he said. "I'll be back by dark." Her fingers tightened in the blanket. "Don't ask the sheriff to help?" she said quickly, fear gathering like a storm behind her eyes. "They laugh sometimes, or they look away, and then word spreads that you spoke." "I'm not going to talk," he said. "I'm going to listen to what men tell on themselves when they drink." She nodded, slow, uncertain. He turned one boot in the stirrup and paused. "If someone knocks," he said, "there's a lever by the stove. Pull it. The bar drops against the door. There's a pistol in the top drawer under the flour. It's loaded. I won't be mad if you use it, even if you shoot the door and not the man." She blinked. "You left me a gun." "I left you a choice," he said. He swung into the saddle. The horse shifted, impatient. He gathered the reins and looked down at her, a woman without a name, with a brand where her name should have been. He tipped his hat once. She lifted her chin the smallest degree. It was almost a salute. As he turned toward the road, her voice followed him, thin but steady. "You didn't ask me what they call me." He stopped. "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted me to know." Silence. Then barely more than breath, Clara. He repeated it in his head and did not say it aloud the way a man warms a word in his pocket before the cold can take it. "I'll be back," he said. Which wasn't the same as "I promise," but it was the only coin he had. He nudged the horse into motion and rode toward Silverton, toward the saloon where liquor unstitched tongues, and the sheriff's office where silence had weight, toward the place where 3 letters might still mean something if he let them. Behind him, the cabin door thudded shut. The latch clicked. The wind took whatever sound came after and carried it across the flats. Ethan did not look back. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear had had his eyes for 5 years, and he was tired of letting it steer. The ridge rose ahead in a long, low line. Somewhere beyond it, men laughed at stories they shouldn't tell, and somewhere under that laughter, women learned to shrink their souls to fit inside a skin that wasn't safe. He leaned forward, spurred once, and the horse broke into a steady lope. The prints he'd read at dawn were fading under noon's hard light, but he no longer needed them. He had a name in his pocket and a set of letters burned on his heart. The first was soft as a prayer. The second was sharp as a knife. Between them lay a path he could no longer refuse. By the time the cottonwoods thinned and the road bent toward town, the day had gone bright and brittle, the kind that breaks things clean. Ethan rode into it without blinking. The town of Silverton woke slow like a drunk shaking off whiskey. Smoke curled from the blacksmith's forge, children's laughter trailed faint from the schoolyard, and the saloon's door creaked even though it wasn't noon yet. Ethan Cole rode down the main street at an easy pace, reins loose in one hand, hat brim shadowing his eyes. He hadn't been here in months, maybe longer. When a man spends his days fixing fences and talking to no one but his horse, the noise of a town feels foreign, like stepping into another man's dream. He dismounted in front of the hitching post outside the saloon. His boots hit the dirt with a hollow thud. The sound seemed to draw eyes, a shopkeeper sweeping her stoop, a pair of cowhands leaning against the livery rail. They looked, then looked away. Ethan was used to that. The saloon smelled of sweat liquor and desperation. Half a dozen men crowded around tables, cards slapped against wood coins clinking. The piano in the corner leaned out of tune, played by a kid who looked too young to shave. Ethan moved through the haze and ordered a whiskey. He didn't drink it. He just held the glass, turning it slow, listening. It didn't take long. Men talked more than they meant to when whiskey loosened their jaws. He heard it first in whispers from a table near the back. Two riders hunched close, their boots dusty from miles. One leaned in, muttering about 3 girls gone in 4 months. Another spat into his cup, muttering that the sheriff wouldn't lift a finger without proof. Their voices carried the bitter edge of men too tired to fight, but too angry to let silence sit. Ethan's eyes flicked toward them, but didn't linger. He sipped once from his glass and kept still, his ears sharp. Another voice cut through the noise, this one louder, cockier. A man at the far table bragged about easy money, about work that don't leave a trail. His laugh was wrong, too sharp, too hungry. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then the sheriff walked in. Sheriff Leland, broad-shouldered mustache, neat eyes dull from too many years spent choosing the easy road. He scanned the saloon, his gaze brushing over Ethan without recognition. Or maybe with recognition, but no interest. He clapped one of the louder men on the shoulder, ordered a drink, and leaned against the bar. Ethan waited silent until the sheriff caught his stare. Cole Leland said, like a man recalling a name he'd misplaced. "Didn't think you came down much anymore. Fence trouble?" Ethan set his glass down. His voice was flat steady. 3 girls. Vanished. The sheriff's mouth tightened. Rumors. 2 from Davis, 1 from Santa Fe. Ethan said, not blinking. All under 25. All gone without a trace. Leland looked away, muttering something about no witnesses, no evidence. His tone was weary, rehearsed. Not much point stirring up panic when there's nothing to be done. Ethan let the silence stretch. Then he nodded once, slow. "That's what you tell yourself, huh?" The sheriff bristled. "Careful, Cole. It's not my job to chase ghosts." "Then whose job is it?" Ethan asked. His voice cut sharper than he meant, but he didn't reel it back. The sheriff shifted, but he didn't answer. He downed his drink instead, setting the glass with a sharp clink. Ethan knew the conversation was over. Leland would keep his eyes shut until someone forced them open. Ethan pushed away from the bar. He didn't finish his whiskey. He didn't need the burn in his throat when the burn in his chest was worse. He walked out, mounted his horse, and rode slow down the street. He could feel the town's eyes on him, but he didn't return the look. By the time he reached the open flats, the sun was sliding toward late afternoon. His mind churned with the sheriff's dismissal, with the laughter of men who knew too much, with the faint scar of 3 letters etched into a woman's wrist back at his cabin. When he reached home, dusk was pooling across the fields. The cabin stood quiet, smoke curling from the chimney. Relief loosened something in his chest. She was still there. Inside, Clara sat by the fire, the blanket wrapped close. Her eyes tracked him the second he stepped in, questioned sharp in their gray depths. "Town," she said, not quite asking. He hung his coat, set his hat on the peg, and took his rifle from the door. He sat at the table and pulled a cloth over the barrel, cleaning it with slow, practiced strokes. She hesitated, then asked, why Ethan didn't look up. His voice was low, steady, the kind that carried more weight than volume. Sometimes bad men need to know someone's still watching. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy as the night outside. Then she reached forward. Her hand brushed his just for a second, but enough. Ethan froze the rifle stock firm in his grip, her touch softer than anything he'd felt in years. When she pulled back, her expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but something close. And for the first time since his wife's grave had gone cold, Ethan felt a flicker of purpose. The world might not check if he was breathing, but maybe just maybe it mattered that he stood. Morning turned the plains the color of old pennies, and the wind carried the dry whisper of bunch grass along the fence wire. Ethan Cole moved the way men move when they have more to lose than they admit. Deliberate eyes cutting from ridge to creek bed, counting small things, a recent ash ring where someone had doused a fire with boot-scoop dirt, the forked print of a spur that wasn't his, a sliver of blue cloth snagged on barbed wire. He filed each sign away, a ledger of quiet trespass. Then he went home and cooked breakfast for two. Clara sat at the table now instead of the floor, the blanket draped around her shoulders like a shawl someone might have chosen rather than clutched in defense. She still flinched at certain sounds, the kettle's hiss, the click of the door latch. But she hid the flinch better each day, the way you learn to cross a wobbly bridge without staring through the slats at the water. He set a plate of eggs and fried potatoes near her hand and didn't point out that she ate all of it. She noticed him not noticing, and that seemed to be its own kind of mercy. After breakfast, he showed her the bar behind the door again. "If anyone knocks, throw this first," he said. "Even if you think it's me." She studied the iron, then his face. "What if it is you? Then I'll say so 3 times. Same words. If you don't hear it 3 times, don't open." "What words?" He paused. A man doesn't pick a password to sound pretty. He picks one that won't enter a stranger's mouth by accident. "Red Earth," he said, 3 times. She nodded. "Red Earth," she repeated softly, as if tasting the weight of it. "All right." He took her to the drawer under the flower and laid the pistol on a folded towel. "You don't have to fire it," he said, "but I want your hands to know the shape." Her fingers hovered. She'd been bound with wire long enough to learn the smell of rust. Steel didn't invite her. Still, she wrapped her hands around the grip. He showed her how to thumb the hammer back and ease it forward without letting it fall, how to point and breathe and not rush. They didn't pull the trigger. They didn't have to. Sometimes what saves you is not killing a thing, but knowing you could, if you must. They went outside as the light climbed. There was a strip of hard earth beyond the porch, where grass refused to grow. Ethan handed her a brush, and the old gelding blinked at them, patient, resigned. Clara lifted the currycomb and set to work. Her brushstrokes were careful, at first jerky, like her hands were remembering how to be hands, and not just tools for survival. The horse sighed and dropped his head, and something in her shoulders lowered with it. She began to hum under her breath, a tune that moved like a creek finding its channel. "What is that?" Ethan asked, surprised to hear his own voice. "Garden song," she murmured. "My grandmother used to sing it. Said herbs grow straight when they hear it. What herbs? Comfrey and thyme. Sage. Feverfew for headaches. Mint for the heat." She glanced at the empty patch by the shed. If there were seeds. He nodded once and set aside the thought with a dozen others. Later he'd ride past the mercantile and see what seeds winter had spared. The day folded into chores, the kind that keep a place alive. He split wood while she hauled kindling in her skirt and piled it careful, her breath puffing in the cool. He fixed a loose hinge on the stall where the latch stuck. She stood nearby and handed him nails, choosing each as if its straightness mattered to the horse's sleep. When the sun slid higher, she took a broom to the porch. Dust rose and fell, and the boards began to show their grain again. Work can sand a jagged day to something a person can hold without bleeding. By afternoon, he rode the south line jaw tight. In a shallow bend of the dry creek, he found a circle of stones still warm under his palm. Soot smudged the rocks. A twist of charred mesquite lay crosswise, black as gunmetal. No ashes blew free. Someone had tamped them down careful. The prince led away toward a stand of juniper, then disappeared into rockmen who understood how to walk without leaving their names behind. He followed to the edge of the ridge and stopped the land spilling away in waves of tawny grass. He could sense eyes in that distance, the way a man senses a storm that hasn't yet raised dust. Back at the ranch, he strung a line of thin wire waist-high between 2 cottonwoods and tied 3 flattened tins to it. If a horse moved careless through the gap, the cans would jingle a warning. He set another string by the north fence and broke a bottle behind the shed, threading the shards into the top of a low rail where a hand might grasp and learn regret. He didn't feel proud of any of it. It felt like being sober in a room full of drunks. You measured exits and cleared paths, not because you liked the company, but because you wanted everyone to get out alive. Clara watched, saying nothing. Later, as the light slanted low and the air took on that cooled copper taste of evening, she came out with a tin pail and knelt near the shed. She scraped a small square of earth with a trowel until the dirt gave rich and dark underneath. Grandmother said things grow. If the ground remembers kindness, she said almost to herself. She planted 3 thumbfuls of garlic he'd forgotten in a sack by the window. The cloves went into the earth like pale teeth being returned to a jaw that promised not to bite. When they rested on the porch, he gave her the old wool coat that had hung on the peg since his wife. She pulled it around her and stared toward the fence. Shadows lengthened, merged. A hush fell that hour when even the birds seemed to listen. "Do you want to know?" she asked. Finally, eyes fixed on nothing. "Only if you want to tell me," he said. Her mouth worked once, twice. Then the words came flat as pennies, heavy as iron. "They don't like names. They like numbers 259. We were those first. Some man said it's cleaner that way. Cleaner to sell a number than a person. Then later they burned letters, JKS. Sometimes they said Jakes, sometimes Jacks. Men who buy women don't care how you spell their sins." Ethan said nothing. He didn't shift in his chair. The boards creaked once under his boot. "They take your shoes so you can't run fast," she said. "And they tell you the coyotes wait outside the circle. Sometimes they don't hit you for days. That's worse. The waiting is a kind of hitting." She swallowed. "We were in a low shack by a cliff, and I told myself if I could hear the wind, then I wasn't the same as the walls." "How did you get away?" he asked, gentle as he could shape the words. She shook her head, the coat collar brushing her jaw. "A man dropped a bottle. It broke. He cursed and went out. They were laughing. I took a shard and worked at the wire. It cut my skin. I didn't stop. When the door opened again, I was gone." She huffed a laugh with no light in it. "Gone is not the same as safe." "No," he said. "It isn't." She fell quiet. The sky flashed orange, then dulled to bruised purple. In the distance, coyotes called first one, then another. The sound stiffened her spine. He didn't reach to touch her. He said, "Sometimes I sit on this porch and count the calls. If the number's even, I tell myself tomorrow won't break anything new." "What if it's odd?" she asked. "Then I sit anyway." She breathed out, and it was almost a laugh. When they went inside, he set the pistol on the table. "You should know how it feels to hold it when your heart isn't running," he said. "We'll do that now. Tomorrow, if you want, we can fire it into dirt, not at anything living." She nodded, came to the table, and picked up the gun. Her hands steadied faster this time. He showed her again, wrists straight, elbows soft, sight-lined, not with hunger but with care. "Breath in," he said, and breathed with her. "Breath out." She lowered the gun and looked at him. "It's loud in my head," she confessed. "It will be quiet enough when it counts," he said. "Loud things get quiet when your life wants them to." She set the pistol down and folded her hands around the tin cup he handed her. The lamplight cut a smooth line across her cheek. "Do you ever think you missed your chance to do right?" she asked. He could have lied. He didn't. "Yes." "Is this it, then?" Her gaze flicked to the bar, the pistol, the wire with tins, the door, the single window, the iron stove. "Is this your chance?" He looked toward the black square that was the outside, where 3 men might be sitting. Horses and rolling cigarettes waiting for a cabin to exhale, enough that they could slide inside unnoticed. "It's a start," he said. She stared into the lamp eyes reflecting 2 small suns. "I don't want to be saved and then sit here like a ghost because I'm afraid to breathe," she said. "I want to plant things. I want to stand in my own shoes." "You will," he said, because saying it was part of making it true. "We'll buy seeds in town. We'll get you boots that fit." The word boots hung between them like a promise with leather soles. He doled out the night's work in quiet tasks. He damped the fire so it wouldn't flare bright through the window. She folded blankets as if neat edges could edge the world toward order. He checked the lever again. She whispered red earth under her breath until the phrase felt like a prayer 2 people could share without a preacher to hear it. Before bed, he opened the window an inch for air and listened. Far off, a horse stamped. Metal chinked bit or spur he couldn't tell. He could taste strangers in the dark the way a man tastes a storm in the back of his throat. He lay on the mattress facing the door boots within reach. Across the room, Clara settled on the narrow bed he'd cleared days ago and not mentioned since. She didn't close the door between their rooms. Neither did he. That felt like the bravest act either of them had accomplished all week. "You sleeping?" he asked, knowing the answer. "Not yet," she said. "Count my breaths, then," he said. "I'll keep them even." She huffed a small sound that might pass for a smile. "All right," she whispered. "Go on." He did. He breathed slow, steady, letting the rhythm fill the space where words might rattle and scare the dark. After a while, her breaths matched his, and the cabin settled around them like an old coat pulled up to the chin. He didn't close his eyes. Dawn would come, and with it, decisions. He would ride out earlier tomorrow up and over the ridge where the ash ring had been. He would map every blind turn to the shack-side cliff until the path fit into his bones. He would not announce himself. He would not be a man who walked past an alley and pretended not to hear. Outside, the tins on the wire stayed still. Inside, two people who had been numbers and widowers and sacks under trees lay awake and held the line between fear and the thin, stubborn thing that sometimes grows in its place. The wind shifted east overnight, carrying with it the scent of rain far off, though the sky over Silverton stayed sharp and clear. Ethan Cole rose before dawn, pulling on his boots with the same steady rhythm he used when fixing fence posts or mending broken tack. But this morning wasn't ordinary. This morning he moved with a weight in his chest he hadn't felt since the war years when every ride might be the one you didn't ride back from. He sat at the table cleaning his rifle under the lamplight. Each stroke of the cloth against the steel barrel was slow, deliberate. Clara sat across from him, wrapped in his old wool coat, her gray eyes following each motion. She said nothing for a long while, just listened to the soft scrape of metal on cloth and the faint whistle of the kettle. Finally, her voice came low, steady. "You're going." Ethan paused, thumb resting on the rifle's stock. He didn't look up. Tracks don't lie. They're circling. She tightened the coat around her shoulders. "What if they're waiting for you? What if that's what they want?" "Then I'll give them something they didn't plan on," he said, sliding around into the chamber. The click sounded louder than thunder. Clara's breath caught, but she forced her words out. "If you go, will you come back?" Ethan stopped cleaning. He lifted his eyes, meeting hers across the table. He'd learned long ago not to make promises a man couldn't keep. Instead, he spoke the truth plain as the boards under their feet. "Because someone has to," he said. She flinched like the words carried more weight than gunfire. He finished oiling the rifle, set it beside the revolver on the table, and pulled his coat tight. Outside, dawn was only a pale suggestion on the horizon. Clara followed him to the door. Her hand lingered near the bar as if tempted to drop it into place even before he stepped outside. "If they come while you're gone, you know what to do," Ethan cut in gently. "Red earth 3 times. Then shoot if you have to." Her chin trembled, but she lifted it high. For the first time since he'd found her under the cottonwood tree, she looked less like a cornered animal and more like someone ready to fight for her breath. "I don't want to be afraid forever," she whispered. "You won't," he said. "Fear don't last. People do." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and turned toward the ridge. Clara stood in the doorway, her figure etched against the flicker of lamplight, watching him until the distance swallowed his outline. The land beyond the ranch opened wide and silent, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort but warns. Ethan kept low in the saddle, guiding his horse through dry creek beds and shallow ravines. He knew how to ride unseen. War had taught him that. Each hoofbeat was measured, each breath quiet. The tracks appeared again near the junipers, 3 horses heading west. He followed them to where the ground rose, curving into a ridge that looked down over a barren stretch of country. He dismounted, crouched low, and studied the land. Smoke curled faintly against the cliff face. There it was, the shack. Leaning against rock like a scar, its roof patched with tin, a thin thread of smoke marking life inside. He watched long enough to hear it, the coarse laughter of men who believed they owned the night. Ethan's stomach tightened. He thought of Clara's scar of the brand burned into her wrist, of her voice shaking when she spoke of numbers instead of names. He adjusted the strap on his rifle, every muscle taut. He didn't ride straight for the shack. He circled wide, moving quiet, using gullies and scrub as cover, until he was no more than a shadow skimming the edge of dusk. He tied his horse to a low branch and crouched, the air dry and biting in his lungs. Behind him, miles away, Clara sat in a cabin waiting for the sound of tin cans on wire. Her trust in him was fragile, but it was real, and that was heavier on Ethan's shoulders than the rifle slung across his back. He whispered into the dark, not a prayer exactly, but something like it. "Hold, Clara. Just hold." Then he crept closer to the shack, each step measured the firelight inside flickering against rough walls. Laughter rose again, sharper this time, and his jaw locked. The men inside had no idea a reckoning was at their door. Ethan lay belly down in the sage, the grit of red earth biting into his elbows, and let the shack's sounds sift into him piece by piece. Men laughing in that hollow way that said they didn't know quiet could be holy. Bottles clinking, a chair leg scraping the floor, boots dragging. No horses close by that meant their mounts were tied on the far side under the cliff lip out of the wind. Good. Less noise when things broke. He waited. Patience isn't a gift, it's a scar that learns how to hold. He counted breaths, the same even rhythm he'd offered Clara, to steady her in the dark. When the bottle clinked a second time, he shifted to a knee, testing the ground for stones that might roll under his weight. When it clinked a third time, he knew. That was when men got sloppy. He tugged his bandana higher to cut the smoke he meant to make and moved. The door had been patched with planks from a shipping crate. Letters ghosted along one board, flower like the world had meant for softer use than this. Ethan eased along the wall where the rock face swallowed most of the light. He could see shadows thrown wide across the floorboards. 3 men, one hunched, one sprawling with his boots on a table, one shifting near a corner where a 4th shadow was smaller wrong. A girl, he thought. A girl pressed down so far in herself she barely made a shape. He set his hand on the latch, breathed once, and didn't lift it. Instead, he lifted his boot. Wood gives more truth to a heel than to a hand. He kicked. The door slammed inward, the lantern flare leaping in surprise. The man nearest the table jerked up so fast his chair fell, and the butt of Ethan's rifle met him square center chest with a crack that stole the room's first breath. The sprawled one went for his belt, metal flashing. Ethan aimed high, squeezed, and the bullet vanished the lantern into a sheet of bright glass and hot dark. Smoke and sparks blossomed. The shack sucked its own breath and choked on it. "Don't," Ethan said, voice low as rope pulled tight. Some men need to see a man to fear him. These instead heard the evenness, the steadiness. The second man's hand stalled at his holster. The third held a knife he hadn't yet lifted to purpose. It clattered when he lowered it, skittering under the table like a guilty thing. "Hands where I can hear them," Ethan said. "You mean see the chest-struck one coughed. I said what I meant." Wood creaked as arms lifted slow. In the corner, someone let out a small noise like a bird learning itself again. Ethan didn't look there yet. You don't look at the thing you're here to save before you unset the teeth around it. Who the hell, the coughing man started. "Careful with that," Ethan said. "Hell hears. You Cole." The name came from the dark with a rasp of disbelief, as if his life had walked in wearing a different coat. "That you—" The voice spun a memory. Bisbee's stinking alley, a brag tipped with spittle. JKS punched into flesh and shoved toward the world like a dare. Ethan couldn't see the man's forearms in the smoke, but the letters were there. He felt them same as a snake under a boot tells itself with a twitch. "I know the letters you wear," Ethan said. Silence bent the room in half. The third man breathed shallow. Ethan could hear the tremor hitching his throat. "On your knees," Ethan said. "All 3. The boards groaned as weight shifted lower. He kept the rifle easy in his hands, muzzle hovering where a man's choices live. He backed toward the corner without turning the way a man learns to move when he's been outnumbered and still prefers to stand. "Now." He let the corner claim his shadow and dropped a hand palm open, not touching. "Miss," he said to the small shape. A flinch. He kept his palm in air where she could read it as nothing. "I've got a coat," he said. "I'm going to set it down right here. You take it if you want it. If you don't, you leave it. Either way, you come with me." Another beat of useless smoke. Then the softest rustle as her fingers found the edge of wool. He slid the coat toward her, heard it swallow her shoulders, and felt the world tip 1 degree toward right. He backed 3 steps and let his boot toe find hers. Bare, cold, small. He didn't think he moved. Lifted her under the arms, weight lighter than truth, and set her behind him where the door's shape made a kind of promise outside exists. Walk, he told the men, to the far wall. Slow. You're not taking property out of here, the coughing one spat bravado, fighting to stand up on broken ribs. Ethan had moved men with words before, but sometimes a line needs a marker you can't call back. He let the rifle speak again, one clean shot that bit a hole in the rafters and spat splinters onto the floor. The sound caromed around the little room until it wasn't a sound at all, but a shape everyone had to step around. She's not property, Ethan said. She never was. This ain't your business, another voice tried, thinner, now. Everything I don't stop becomes my business later, Ethan said. And I'm tired of late. He felt the girl's breath stutter against his back. He could smell the heat of spilled liquor and the flare of fear as it burned down pride to ash. You walk when I tell you, he went on, and you stay breathing. You reach for anything, and I will turn this room into a prayer you weren't ready to say. No one argued with that. Boots scuffed. A bottle rolled and caught a plank seam ticking like a clock that didn't know what hour it meant to claim. Ethan stepped backward, bringing the girl with him, keeping his shoulders angled so he covered both the men and the doorway in a narrow triangle only a fool would try to fill. Door, he said. The cool night smelled of dust and iron and a small mercy wind. He drew her through, turned his body to shield her from the shack's mouth. His horse lifted its head, ears cupped forward, patient as iron in a forge. Ethan got the girl to the tree, pressed the reins against the horse's neck, and looked at the saddle. He couldn't swing her up and hold the rifle in aim. There's a math to rescue you learn on the fly. So he shoved the rifle into the scabbard, lifted her, and set her in the saddle like she weighed nothing at all. She made a sound surprise, pain both. He put her hands on the horn. Hold, tight. A shout snapped from the doorway. Hey, Ethan, turned revolver already in his hand. The coughing man had found his courage where a lot of men find it, backing it with another man's breath. He'd edged to the jam and thought the night would hide him. It didn't. Ethan put a bullet into the dirt by his boot. It jumped dust like a tiny exclamation. I said you get a first warning, Ethan told him. That was it. You think you can ride out of here with her? The man barked, trying again on a different key. We'll hunt you and hang you on your own gate. Ethan stepped close enough that his voice could stay low. If you touch another girl, he said, each word a nail. You set true before the hammer falls, you won't get a second warning. For a breath, no one moved. The shack's smoke eased out the door and unwound into the sky. Somewhere on the far side of the cliff, a horse blew and stamped, smelling a change it couldn't name. Ethan turned and swung into the saddle behind the girl, in one motion honed in harder places than this. He wrapped one arm around her middle to pin her steady and gathered the reins with the other. Lean back, he told her. You won't fall if you trust my seat. I don't know how, she whispered. You don't have to know. Just breathe. He touched his heels to the gelding's ribs, and the horse started into a careful trot that ate ground without slapping it. Behind them, men spilled out into the yard, squinting through smoke. One lifted a pistol and fired wild. The bullet struck rock 20 feet off and sang itself thin into the night. Ethan didn't return it. A shot fired in anger never lands where a man wants. A shot fired in purpose finds its place. His purpose was 30 miles east and wore an old wool coat that smelled like his late wife, and a fear he planned to starve. They slipped into the gully he'd scouted, its dark a curtain that held. The gelding found his feet like a memory. The girl's spine pressed hard into his chest. He could feel the tremor that rode her bones, and he kept his arm steady around her, a post in a flood. You got a name, he asked when the land widened and the shack's noise went small. Her reply was a scratch. Lena, she said, as if names were expensive and she didn't mean to spend it all at once. Lena, he repeated, and he didn't say anything else to that. Some names don't want company the first time they stand up in a mouth. They rode in silence except for Leather's whisper and the low rush of sage as it brushed stirrups. When they reached the ridgeline where the world tipped toward home, Ethan reined in. He looked back. The shack was a dim pulse of bad light under the cliff. If those men came, they would come noisy and late. He had time to make the next right thing, and then the next. You're safe enough to be brave now, he said, not sure if he spoke to Lena or to himself or to the night. Can you hold another mile I can hold, she said, and the words had more bone in them than the girl did. They dropped off the ridge toward the flats where the land finally gave itself to speed. Ethan loosened the reins and let the horse stretch, not a gallop, not yet, but a ground-covering lope that let the air shear their faces clean. The stars were beginning their climb. He watched the eastern horizon thin to a lighter dark and thought of a door with a lever and a pistol in a drawer and a word like a law only two people knew red earth. Clara, hold. He let the horse spill them forward until the cabin roof would be a line against the starlight if the cottonwoods weren't in the way. Then he checked himself and steered north instead. He told the sheriff he was out of the ghost-chasing business. Maybe the sheriff was. Ethan wasn't. He didn't plan to ask permission. He planned to drop proof on a desk and strip choice from a man who liked to pretend he didn't have any. He angled them toward the river road that curved into Silverton. The girl's head knocked against his collarbone once before she caught herself. He tightened his arm. Almost, he murmured. You did good. She swallowed and didn't answer. That was all right. He didn't need thanks. He needed daylight and paper and a lawman too embarrassed to keep sleeping. Behind them, the cliff kept its secret badly. A late shout rattled the rocks, answered by another. He didn't look back. Men who live by chasing don't fare well following a man who knows when not to run. He set his jaw toward town and let the miles unwind. When the first lantern of Silverton winked through the cottonwoods, he exhaled. Not safe. Not finished. But the part where a person disappears without anyone saying their name, that part was over. Lena, he said again, to keep her anchored to the saddle and to the world. I'm taking you to the sheriff. I'll set truth on his desk and make him touch it. What if he won't? Her voice was no bigger than a thread. Then I'll put it in his hand and close his fingers around it, Ethan said. One way or another, it becomes his. He turned down the main street, the saloon still coughing music into the night. He didn't slow. He rode straight for the square building with the star on the door dismounted in one fluid drop and lifted Lena down like a man placing a fragile thing where it can finally stop breaking. Stay behind me, he said. You don't have to speak unless you want to. But if you do, I'll stand there and make sure your words don't fall. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. Sheriff Leland looked up from a ledger annoyance already halfway to his face. It never made the journey. Ethan laid a broken blade on the counter, its edge sticky with truth, then set beside it a scrap of cloth that had once been a dress and now was nothing but a testimony men couldn't argue with. Found her under your jurisdiction, Ethan said, and his voice didn't have to rise to fill the room. Do your job. The sheriff's mouth opened. He looked at the girl, then at Ethan, then at the things on his desk that had more to say than any man. Ethan didn't smile. Out in the street, the town kept pretending the night was harmless. Inside, the world had shifted its weight. He felt it in his bones. She's not yours, he said again, quieter this time, but a bell you couldn't unring. She never was. And when he turned his head toward the door, home was the direction his eyes went first. Sheriff Leland stared at the ruined blade and the blood-marked cloth like he wanted them to vanish. The lamp lit them harsh, turning every stain darker. Lena hunched inside Ethan's coat, hovered by the door. The office smelled of ink and stale smoke. Somewhere outside, a piano stumbled through a song. Ethan didn't speak. He let silence press until it weighed more than words. This your trouble? Cole Leland asked finally. I found it in your county, Ethan said evenly. Found her too. The sheriff's jaw flexed. Got names? 3 letters, JKS. Ethan's voice was stone. You've seen 'em. For a heartbeat, Leland froze. Then he snapped his ledger shut and barked for his deputy. Orders came, quick fetch. Doc Harlan telegraphed the road post riders. The deputy stared at the evidence, swallowed hard, and ran. Leland cleared his throat, eyes landing on Lena. You need a woman's care, not questions. Mrs. Finch will take you in. Ethan's nod was final. She won't ask the wrong things. Lena's hands twisted at the cuff. Not alone. You won't be, Ethan said, opening the door. At the boarding house, Mrs. Finch took one look and ushered Lena inside without fuss. Hot water, clean sheets, she said, closing the door before Ethan could pay. He lingered a moment, listening to kettles lift and feet moving with purpose. That was enough. Back at the office, Leland had pulled down a map. Shacks here cliffside mesquite burned at the root. 2, maybe 3 men. You didn't bring one back, I brought the one who mattered. The others heard me. The sheriff's eyes hardened. I'll need warrants. You'll need to move, Ethan countered. The law can catch up. After a long pause, Leland signed the papers. He looked older when he sanded the ink. Posse meets at dawn, he said, then hesitated. Don't go alone again. Ethan tipped his hat and left. The ride home was steady, the moon silvering the fences, the wind carrying only coyotes. At the porch, he called the words 3 times red earth. Red earth, red earth. The bar lifted, the door opened. Clara stood with the pistol low coat on her shoulders, eyes watching him. Relief uncoiled across her face. You came back, she said. I said I would. Inside the fire burned low 2 cups waiting on the table. She served stew without asking. He told her of warrants of Mrs. Finch of dawn. Her gaze sharpened. Will the law stay standing when the sun's gone? It'll stand tomorrow. I pushed it upright. Now it has to learn its legs. They ate in quiet. Afterward, she cleaned the cuts on his hands, binding them with strips of linen. Her touch was careful, sure. I thought you might not come back, she whispered. I did. And I brought proof that we can keep doing it. She nodded slowly. The house sounds different, she said. Like it knows a man came home with a reason. He took his chair by the door rifle across his knees. She lay down in the narrow bed facing him, not the wall. Outside, the tin stayed still. Inside, the cabin held. The sun rose behind a veil of smoke. Ethan Cole caught the first thread of it as he saddled his horse, breath puffing white in the cold. The posse Sheriff Leland had scraped together 6 men with rifles, and more fear than pride waited on the edge of Silverton stamping boots, muttering. Dust clung to their coats, but it was the kind of dust men wear when they're unused to leaving town. Ethan rode in quiet reins, loose, jaw set. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, some wary, some grateful, some hoping he'd take the lead so they could hang back without shame. He didn't want the role, but it sat on him anyway. Cliff shacks west of here, Leland said. We ride light, keep close. They set out horses, moving single file through gullies. The men tried to talk, but silence chewed at them until only hoofbeats filled the air. Ethan's eyes scanned ridges, his hands loose but ready. Each print in the dirt, each broken mesquite branch told a story. By midday they reached the ridge. Smoke still clung faint above the shack. Ethan raised his hand, halting them. We go in quiet, he said. One of the men, young face too smooth, swallowed. And if they shoot first, then you keep breathing long enough to shoot straighter, Ethan said. They dismounted. Boots sank soft in the earth. The shack hunched against the cliff like it was ashamed. The laughter was gone now. Just silence broken by the wind. Ethan eased forward, rifle raised. The door creaked when he pushed. Inside, empty bottles, ashes still warm in the hearth, and walls that stank of sweat and fear. The place was abandoned. They're gone, one man muttered, relief leaking into his voice. No, Ethan said. He knelt, touching the dirt near the doorway. Fresh boot prints. Deep. Heavy. They left this morning. Leland cursed under his breath. They're on the move. Ethan's jaw tightened. Toward town. The word sat heavy. Every man there knew what that meant. Silverton's children, its women, its easy laughter in saloons, it was all unguarded if riders meant to punish. We ride back now, Leland ordered. They turned spurred hard, the trail beating back under hooves. Dust rose, lungs burned, and still Ethan pushed faster. His mind wasn't on the town alone. It was on the cabin, on Clara sitting by the stove with the pistol low, waiting for a sound at the door. When they crested the ridge, the sight stopped them cold. Far in the distance, a column of smoke rose not from a hearth, but from fire, meant to destroy. A barn on the outskirts, maybe more. The riders had struck. God help us, one man breathed. Ethan's grip on the reins tightened until his knuckles blanched. No, he said. God can wait. We help ourselves. They thundered down the slope, the posse scattering to flank the town. Ethan veered east toward his ranch, the fear in his chest louder than hoofbeats. If the smoke reached his roof, if Clara's courage met more than shadows, he would be too late. Ethan Cole drove his horse hard across the flats, the smoke on the horizon pulling at him like a rope around his chest. Each hoofbeat pounded against the earth, and in his skull a rhythm that said, faster, faster, faster. The posse had scattered toward the town's edge, but Ethan broke east toward the place that mattered more than fences or barns, the cabin with one door, one window, and a woman inside who had already seen enough fire to last a lifetime. The smell hit him before the sight did acrid heavy the bite of green wood burning. His gut clenched. Then he saw it. A neighbor's barn smoldered near the creek flames curling up into the pale sky. The wind carried sparks like cruel messengers toward the cottonwoods near his own line. His cabin roof was clear for now, but smoke hung low, crawling toward it like a predator testing distance. At the yard's edge, Clara stood. Rifle braced to her shoulder, pistol shoved into her waistband, the wool coat wrapped around her like a banner of defiance. Her eyes locked on the ridge, steady, unblinking. The wire with tins Ethan had strung rattled once in the breeze, but no riders broke through. Not yet. When Ethan pulled into the yard, she didn't flinch at the thunder of hooves. She held her aim, then lowered it when she saw his face. "Red earth," she said once the test. "Red earth. Red earth," Ethan answered, pulling up short. Her shoulders sagged with relief, but only for a breath. She jerked her chin toward the ridge. They were here. How many? 4? Maybe 5. Rode close, lit the barn downriver, circled wide after. They wanted me to see. Ethan swung down, rifle in hand. He scanned the horizon. They're trying to scare us out. Make us run so they can take us easy. I didn't run, she said, her voice sharp despite the tremor in it. I stood here. I thought if they came, I'd make the first shot count. He studied her, the set of her jaw, the way her fingers clutched the rifle, like it was more than steel, like it was the last line between being prey and being human. Pride ached in his chest, sharp as any wound. You would have, he said simply. The sound of distant gunfire cracked through the air. Ethan turned his head toward town. Smoke climbed there, too. The gang hadn't just circled, they were splitting their venom, striking both at once. Silverton and the scattered homesteads, punishment for being noticed. Ethan's voice was low, grim. This won't stop at fire. They'll keep burning until someone breaks them. Clara's breath hitched. Then break them. Ethan looked back at her. She wasn't pleading. She was daring him, asking the same question he'd been asking himself every night since he found her. Would he turn away again? Or would he stand? He chambered around. Stay low. If the tins sing, drop the bar and don't wait for me. What if they come through the wall? Then shoot until you stop hearing boots. Her gray eyes flashed fear tangled with steel. She nodded once. Ethan mounted again, turning toward the ridge where riders had vanished. The smoke clawed higher, the gunfire sharper. This wasn't random cruelty anymore. This was war, and it had found them both. He leaned low in the saddle. You won't face it alone, he said, more vow than comfort. Then he spurred his horse hard toward the gunfire, leaving Clara in the doorway with the rifle tight to her shoulder and the weight of his words holding her steady. Ethan Cole crested the ridge at full gallop, the air thick with smoke that clung to his throat like ash. Below, Silverton boiled. Riders wheeled through the outskirts, torches arcing against the twilight barns and sheds catching fire in cruel blossoms. Townsfolk scattered, men with rifles, half-raised women dragging children toward cellars, dogs barking mad enough to break their own throats. The outlaws weren't hiding now. They wanted to be seen. Punishment worked best in daylight with witnesses. Sheriff Leland's posse had scattered, half trying to guard storefronts, half shouting without orders. Gunfire cracked sharp and uneven. A horse screamed. Ethan pulled his gelding down the slope, eyes scanning for the black hats and the mark he'd come to know too well, those jagged letters carved into men's skin like a club no one dared name aloud. Near the livery he saw one. A brute with arms bare, JKS etched raw into the forearm, swinging a torch toward the hayloft. Ethan lifted the rifle in a single motion. The shot cracked the man's staggered torch, tumbling into mud instead of straw. The townsfolk turned at the sound, startled by the precision. Ethan didn't wait for thanks. He spurred into the street, voice carrying "Circle the square, keep the women and children in the church." The sheriff, pale but upright, caught the order and echoed it louder. Men scrambled, dragging barrels to form a barrier, women pulling shutters closed. The church bell clanged, not for prayer, but for warning. Through the smoke, Ethan spotted movement toward the north fence, 3 riders angling for the open flats. Not retreat, flanking. He gritted his teeth. They weren't striking just Silverton. They meant to cut wider to break every ranch that fed this town until no one stood. His mind leapt to Clara, to the small cabin under cottonwoods, 1 door, 1 window, 1 lever bar, and a pistol in the drawer. She was strong, but she was alone. Ethan's chest tightened. "Damn them," he muttered, swinging the gelding north. Leland shouted after him. "Cole, we need every rifle here." "You'll have yours," Ethan barked back. "I've got mine to protect." He spurred hard, cutting through smoke and chaos. Each hoofbeat pounded the truth deeper. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. This was strategy. The gang wanted to burn the roots so nothing could grow back. As he rode, he replayed Clara's face when she'd stood on his porch, rifle braced, whispering, "I didn't run." He clung to that image like armor. She had courage, but courage alone wasn't enough against riders who knew how to circle. The wind shifted, carrying with it not just smoke from Silverton, but a new plume thin darker, curling from the direction of his land. Ethan's blood went cold. No, he growled, heels digging into the gelding's sides. Not her. Not there. The horse stretched muscles, straining. The distance shrank, but not fast enough. Every second felt like a mile. Ethan's mind churned with memories of Bisbee, of turning away once, of telling himself it wasn't his fight. That choice had left scars on Clara's wrist. He would not let it carve another. As the cabin came into view, he saw it, a rider circling near the cottonwoods, torch in hand. The wire tins rattled, faint warning, too late. Ethan lifted his rifle, breath, steady, eyes hard. This time he would not miss his chance. The rider leaned low in the saddle, torch raised high, its flame licking orange against the dusk. Ethan Cole's rifle cracked before the outlaw reached the porch. The shot punched through the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The torch tumbled into the dirt, sputtering out in a hiss of smoke and sparks. The horse bolted, dragging its rider into the cottonwoods before he could recover. Ethan drove his gelding straight into the yard. Red earth, he shouted once, then twice, then a third time as his boots hit the ground. The bar scraped up from inside. The door opened. Clara stood in the frame, rifle, braced, her eyes sharp and steady. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he answered, sweeping his gaze across the fields. Smoke streaked the horizon, but for now the cabin held. The relief lasted a breath. Then the night split with the thunder of hooves. 4 more riders burst over the ridge, guns flashing in the last light. Bullets slapped the dirt-spat chips from the porch rail. Ethan shoved Clara back inside, slammed the door, and dropped the bar into place. "Window," he barked. Clara was already there, rifle barrel steady across the sill. Ethan took the other side, revolver drawn. The outlaws circled the yard, firing wild, shouting curses. Tin cans rattled where horses crashed through the wires, but the barrier slowed them. One horse screamed, tangled in shards by the north fence. "Pick your shots," Ethan told her. "I'll make them count," she said, voice taut but unwavering. The first outlaw swung close, firing at the window. Clara flinched but didn't duck. She squeezed the trigger. The blast rocked her shoulder back, but her aim held. The rider tumbled from the saddle, crashing into the dust with a thud that cut the shouting short for an instant. Ethan fired next, his bullet grazing a horse's flank, spooking it sideways. Its rider lost balance, slammed into the post by the corral, and didn't rise. 2 remained. They pulled back, regrouping, voices sharp in the dark. Ethan knew the type. They weren't running. They were planning. The night thickened. Smoke from Silverton crawled closer, choking the stars. The air reeked of gunpowder and fear, but inside the cabin, Clara's breathing was steady beside his. He risked a glance at her. She reloaded clumsily, but quick jaw set, hair loose across her face. "Not bad," he muttered. She almost smiled. "Not done." The riders charged again. One vaulted from his saddle, aiming to crash through the door. The bar groaned under the impact. Clara gasped. Ethan spun, grabbed the shotgun from the corner, and fired point blank. The blast tore the doorframe apart, sent the outlaw sprawling back into the dust. The door held. Barely. The last rider reined in, hanging back just beyond the firelight. Ethan squinted, heart sinking. This one wasn't reckless. He was waiting, testing. The gang leader. And Ethan knew the real fight was just beginning. The last rider sat tall in the saddle, his outline framed by firelight from the smoldering barn down the ridge. He didn't move, didn't shout. He just stared at the cabin, a silhouette cut from stone. The horse beneath him stamped restless, but the man's grip was easy, like he had all the time in the world. Ethan Cole knew that kind of calm. He'd seen it in war and men who killed not for chaos, but for craft. This wasn't just another outlaw. This was the one who made others ride. The leader. The man eased forward, boots glinting in the light. His voice carried low and sharp as a knife sliding from its sheath. Cole, I heard about you. A man who drags ghosts home and thinks he can feed 'em supper. Ethan leaned against the shattered doorframe, shotgun in hand. You've been whispering in smoke long enough. Step into fire, see if your name holds. The leader laughed cold, without joy. My name don't matter. The mark does. He lifted his sleeve and the fire caught the jagged letters burned into his skin, JKS deeper and crueler than Clara's scar. We don't die easy, Cole. We multiply. Clara stiffened at the window breath sharp. Ethan steadied his voice. Then tonight you subtract. The leader kicked his horse forward, gun flashing. The first bullet smashed into the porch post, splintering wood. Ethan fired back the blast, lighting the night. The leader wheeled his horse aside, quick as a rattler returning fire. Glass shattered as a shot tore through the window. Clara ducked, then rose again, her rifle steady. She fired the shot, grazing the outlaw's hat clean off. He snarled, circling wider, his men's bodies still cooling in the dirt behind him. Not bad, he shouted. But you can't guard her forever. Women like that, someone always comes to collect. Ethan's chest burned. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun aimed square. Come collect, then. The outlaw dismounted in one smooth swing, boots crunching the dirt. He dropped the reins, rolling his shoulders like a man limbering for a brawl. His revolver gleamed in one hand, knife in the other. The world shrank. Smoke-curled fire crackled, distant coyotes yipped beyond the ridge. Inside, Clara reloaded with shaking hands, her gray eyes never leaving the man outside. Ethan stepped off the porch. The two men faced each other in the yard, shadows long, breath white in the night air. You should have kept riding in Bisbee, the outlaw said, voice almost amused. We remember men who walk away. You can't wash cowardice off. It stays. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're right. I walked once. Not again. The outlaw lunged. Gunfire cracked knife flashing under the stars. Ethan met him head-on, a clash of fists, steel and rage in the dirt. The duel had begun. The yard lit with muzzle fire, each shot exploding like thunder in the narrow space between them. Ethan Cole felt the sear of a bullet graze his side, hot through his shirt, but he didn't slow. He closed the distance, swinging the shotgun like a club. The stock slammed into the outlaw's jaw, cracking loud enough to echo off the cottonwoods. The man staggered, spit blood, but his grin widened feral. You got fight, Cole, he rasped, but you ain't got enough. The knife flashed. Ethan twisted steel, catching the edge of his sleeve instead of his ribs. He drove his fist forward, knuckles crunching against the man's temple. The outlaw reeled, then surged back with a howl, tackling Ethan into the dirt. They rolled, boots and fists slamming grit, grinding into every cut. From the porch, Clara's voice rang out, Ethan. He couldn't answer. The knife pressed close edge cold against his throat. The outlaw's eyes burned wild, the letters JKS carved deep into his skin, glaring in the firelight. You should have left her hanging, the man hissed. We don't bury our marks, we spread 'em. Rage tore through Ethan. He grabbed the outlaw's wrist vein, straining, forcing the blade away, inch by inch. His free hand found the revolver holstered at his belt. He ripped it free, jammed the barrel against the outlaw's ribs, and fired. The shot thundered through the night. The man's body jolted, his grip loosening. Ethan shoved him off, a chest heaving. The outlaw lay gasping in the dirt, blood seeping dark beneath his eyes, still defiant, even as life drained. This ain't over, he coughed. Others'll come. Always come. Ethan pressed a boot to the man's chest, revolver aimed steady. Then they'll find nothing waiting but me. The outlaw spat one last curse, then stilled. The silence afterward was louder than the fight had been. Only the crackle of fire and Clara's sharp breathing filled the night. Ethan lowered the revolver, shoulders sagging. He turned toward the porch. Clara stood there, rifle in her hands, her face pale, but her eyes burning fierce. She stepped forward slowly until she stood just behind him. "You came back," she whispered again. But this time it wasn't relief. It was truth solid as the earth beneath them. Ethan exhaled, the weight of years sliding from his chest. "I told you someone had to." She lifted her hand, hesitated, then touched his arm where the bullet had grazed. The gesture was small, but it steadied him more than any bandage. For the first time in a long, long while, Ethan felt not just alive, but chosen for this fight, for this woman, for this stand against the dark. Dawn bled slow across the plains, streaking the horizon in bruised gold. Smoke from the night's fires clung heavy in the air, but the wind carried it east, thinning until the cabin stood clear again. The bodies in the yard were still the silence after battle, settling like a shroud. Ethan Cole leaned against the porch post, revolver limp in his hand, blood drying at his side where the bullet had grazed him. He should have felt hollow. Instead, he felt a strange, solid calm, like the ground itself had steadied under his boots. Clara stepped outside, her hair loose from the fight rifle tucked close. Her gray eyes scanned the horizon, cautious, then softened as they settled on him. She moved closer, a strip of linen in her hands torn from the blanket. "Sit," she said. Ethan obeyed, lowering himself onto the porch step. She knelt beside him, cleaning the wound with water from a tin cup. Her fingers were careful but firm, binding the cloth tight around his ribs. He winced once, and she glanced up with a faint, wry smile. "Hurts." "I've had worse," he muttered. "Then you've lived wrong," she replied softly. For a while they said nothing more. The morning was filled with smaller sounds, a sparrow calling from the cottonwoods, the groan of wood cooling after the fire, the rustle of Clara's coat as she tied the bandage. Life reasserting itself in quiet ways. When she finished, she sat back, drawing her knees up. "You fought for me," she whispered, voice trembling not with fear, but with something else, something steadier. "I fought for more than you," Ethan said. He nodded toward the town smoke still rising on the horizon. "For them too. For all the ones who can't stand when it's their turn." Her eyes glistened. "But you came back to me." He met her gaze steady. "Always." The word hung there heavier than any promise he'd ever spoken. Clara drew in a sharp breath, then let it go slow. She stood brushing dirt from her skirt and looked toward the barren patch of earth by the shed. "I want to plant again," she said. Ethan rose, wincing at the pull in his side. "We'll get seed. Mercantile keeps some in sacks." "You said comfrey, sage, mint." Her lips twitched into the smallest smile. "And feverfew, for headaches." He studied her then, the way her shoulders stood straighter, the way her hands no longer shook around the rifle, the way her voice carried weight instead of only shadow. She was healing not with sudden leaps, but with small, stubborn steps. They spent the morning burying the dead outlaws in shallow graves beyond the cottonwoods. Clara worked beside him, silent but resolute, her hands raw from the shovel. When they were done, Ethan set stones over the mounds, not for respect, but to keep the coyotes out. Afterward, they rested on the porch cups of bitter coffee, warming their hands. Clara leaned back, her eyes closed, humming the garden song again. Ethan listened, letting the tune sink into him like roots finding water. For the first time in years, laughter rose in him, low, quiet, but real. Clara's eyes opened, and she laughed too, surprised the sound breaking something brittle inside both of them. The world outside still smoldered. More riders might come, more battles might wait. But here on this porch, with 2 cups on the table and a patch of earth ready for planting, something fragile had been won. Ethan leaned back, watching the sky clear. "We'll keep it," he said, "day by day, whatever it takes." And for the first time since he buried his wife, he believed it. The days that followed carried a strange, steady rhythm. Silverton rebuilt what the fire had taken. Barns patched with fresh lumber, smoke-scorched fences, straightened families whispering prayers over suppers where children slept lighter than before. The sheriff walked taller in town, but Ethan Cole knew the weight of those new warrants came less from his ink than from the proof Ethan had shoved onto his desk. Justice had been forced awake, and the town was finally learning how to keep its eyes open. At the ranch, Healing wore quieter clothes. Clara no longer curled by the stove. She claimed the narrow bed across the hall, the door open each night, her breathing carrying into Ethan's room, like a reminder that the house wasn't hollow anymore. She swept the porch in the mornings, humming the garden song, and planted garlic shoots that pushed green through the dirt by the shed. One afternoon, she brushed down the gelding while Ethan repaired a corral rail. The sun was sharp, the air smelling of cedar smoke. Clara glanced over hair falling loose from its knot. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. Ethan set down the hammer. "What? Why save me? You could have left me in that sack like the others turned away. You could have told yourself it wasn't your fight." He wiped his hands on his jeans, staring at the ground before meeting her eyes. Because life doesn't always give us what we deserve. But sometimes it gives us someone who sees we deserve better. And that was you. Her throat worked as she swallowed. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "No one's ever said that to me." He looked back toward the fields, voice low. Maybe no one ever looked close enough. That night, Clara didn't sleep across the hall. She moved her blanket to the room beside his, not onto his bed, but near enough that the walls no longer stood between them. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't question it. Some choices don't need words. The following week, she laughed aloud for the first time. Not a nervous chuckle, not a strained exhale, real laughter sudden and bright. Ethan had tripped on a loose board by the barn, cursing under his breath, and the sound startled her before she could hide it. She clapped a hand to her mouth, but the laugh had already broken free. Ethan grinned, the ache in his chest loosening. By the time twilight fell that day, Clara stood barefoot in the garden patch dirt, under her nails humming while she pressed mint seeds into the earth. Ethan leaned on the fence arms folded and let himself breathe in the sound. It was the kind of ordinary moment he'd thought the world had stolen from him forever. When she straightened, brushing soil from her palms, she looked at him across the small patch of green. "Ethan." "Yeah." Her eyes shone gray in the fading light. "I'm not afraid tonight." He nodded once, throat too tight for words. Inside the cabin, she left the door to her room open wide, and for the first time since he'd found her, she slept without the blanket clutched tight around her wrists. Summer settled soft on the plains, the kind that paints the grass with gold and lifts the scent of sage into every breath. The scars of fire still marked the outskirts of Silverton, but life pushed through fresh boards on barns, laughter in saloons, church bells ringing steady. The town remembered fear, but it also remembered standing, and that was enough to keep its spine straight. At the ranch, Ethan Cole rose before dawn as he always had, but now there were 2 cups on the table each morning. Clara filled them both, humming while the kettle hissed. She moved with quiet purpose, sweeping the porch, tending the herbs that sprouted stubborn green beside the shed. The garlic shoots had thickened mint leaves spread fever-few promised blossoms. Life had taken root again, not just in soil, but in her. She no longer flinched at the creak of the door or the crack of the kettle. When the coyotes called at night, she didn't curl tight under blankets. She stood on the porch instead, rifle in hand, breathing slow beside Ethan while the stars bent low overhead. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the land turned the color of old copper, Clara sat on the porch steps. Ethan joined her, their shoulders close but not touching. She stared out at the fading light, her gray eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked quietly. Ethan thought for a long time. He could have said a dozen things, that it was duty or anger or penance for walking away in Bisbee. But none of those were the truth that mattered. "Because someone had to," he said. Clara nodded once, like that answer was enough to steady her forever. She leaned her head against her knees, a faint smile ghosting her lips. For the first time, she looked not like someone surviving, but like someone beginning. They didn't speak after that. Words would have only thinned the moment. They just sat as the stars woke one by one, the air rich with the scent of mint and cedar smoke. Clara never promised to stay. Ethan never asked her to. Yet each morning she opened the door, and each night she returned. Love didn't arrive with fire or thunder. It came quietly, like rain soaking into old wood, like forgiveness, like starting over. And Ethan, who had once believed his life ended the day he buried his wife, finally understood sometimes redemption doesn't ride in with a badge or a crowd. Sometimes it comes on a tired horse carrying a woman who whispered, "Just kill me fast," and left him stumbling back into life instead. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if someone showed up at your door needing more than just a place to sleep? Would you close your eyes and pretend you didn't see? Or would you open that door and maybe save a piece of yourself in the process? Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.